There comes a moment in every life when the noise of the world grows so loud we can no longer hear ourselves think. We chase approval, compare ourselves endlessly, and measure our worth by fleeting standards. But in the silence between distractions, a question whispers, what if the real work is not out there, but within? The journey of transformation begins not in the external world, but within the depths of the self. At the heart of this journey lies self-knowledge, the courageous act of turning inward to explore one's thoughts, fears, desires, motivations, and contradictions. It is not an easy path, and for many it is often avoided. People are more comfortable dissecting the lives of others, offering advice, seeking validation, or hiding behind roles and labels than they are facing the unknown terrain of their own psyche. But any meaningful transformation, any real growth, starts with the willingness to meet oneself without masks, without judgment, and without escape. When a person begins to look inside, they often find more questions than answers. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I truly want? Not what I've been told I should want. Why do I repeat certain patterns, and where do they come from? These questions may seem abstract, but they hold the keys to unlocking a life of authenticity and inner alignment. Without such awareness, individuals live reactively. They respond to situations from a place of conditioning, not consciousness. Their actions are shaped by past wounds, societal expectations, and unconscious fears. But when one starts to observe the self, quietly, honestly, they begin to unravel the layers of illusion they've been living under. This kind of self-inquiry demands more than surface-level introspection. It is not about labeling oneself with convenient traits or simplistic identities. It is about confronting the contradictions within, the light and the shadow, the strengths and the flaws, the noble and the selfish parts of the psyche. True self-knowledge does not flatter the ego. In fact, it often humbles it. A person may realize they are not as kind as they thought, not as courageous, not as clear in purpose, but this clarity, painful as it may be, becomes the soil from which real transformation can grow. In the absence of self-acknowledging, a person becomes fragmented. They act out of alignment, say one thing and do another, feel lost in their own skin. They chase goals that do not fulfill them and relationships that do not nourish them. They may succeed in the eyes of the world, but remain strangers to themselves. And this inner division creates a quiet suffering, a sense that something essential is missing. Yet, when self-awareness is cultivated, the fragments begin to integrate. Choices become more intentional. Values become clearer. The inner life begins to reflect in the outer one. Self-acknowledge is also the foundation of resilience. When you know yourself, your patterns, your triggers, your strengths, you are less shaken by external events. You stop being defined by circumstances or other people's opinions. You carry a center within that helps you navigate the chaos of the world without losing your balance. This groundedness gives birth to self-respect, and with it comes a natural motivation to work hard, not out of guilt, fear, or comparison, but from a place of personal clarity. The work becomes meaningful because it aligns with who you truly are. Self-acknowledge is not a luxury. It is a necessity for anyone who seeks real growth. It is the mirror through which transformation begins. Projection is one of the most subtle yet powerful forces that governs human relationships and personal growth. It is a psychological mechanism where an individual unconsciously attributes their own inner conflicts, insecurities, or desires onto others. While it may provide temporary relief from self-awareness, it ultimately becomes a major obstacle to genuine progress. When people project, they avoid facing the truth about themselves. Instead of confronting their own flaws or unmet needs, They locate them in someone else. They say, "He's so arrogant," when it is their own fragile ego that is unsettled. They claim, "She's always judging me," when in fact they are deeply critical of themselves. This unconscious displacement keeps them stuck in cycles of blame and defensiveness, clouding their ability to grow. In the context of focusing on oneself and working hard, projection serves as a dangerous distraction. It diverts energy outward instead of channeling it inward where it belongs. A person who is constantly watching others, criticizing their success, envying their progress, or competing for validation is not engaged with their own process. Their attention is fragmented. Instead of cultivating discipline, clarity, and personal responsibility, they are tangled in a web of external comparisons. This behavior may feel justified, even rationalized as observation or truth-telling, but it is often rooted in unconscious discomfort with their own limitations. By focusing on the flaws or behaviors of others, they temporarily escape the discomfort of facing their own inner world. What makes projection so dangerous is that it masquerades as insight. People genuinely believe that the problems lie outside of them. They build entire narratives around the shortcomings of others, not realizing that these stories are often mirrors reflecting back their own unacknowledged material. The coworker who always seeks attention might simply reflect one's own desire for recognition. The friend who never takes anything seriously might provoke discomfort because of one's own repressed longing for spontaneity. The mind uses projection as a defense, shielding the ego from painful realizations. But the longer this mechanism operates, unchecked, the more it calcifies into a pattern that prevents change. Overcoming projection requires a high degree of self-awareness and humility. It begins with the question, what part of me is being triggered by this person or situation? This is not a question the ego enjoys because it threatens the illusion of superiority or victimhood. But it is precisely this inquiry that breaks the spell. When a person begins to take responsibility for their emotional reactions, they reclaim their power. No longer at the mercy of external conditions, they can redirect their energy toward inner work and self-improvement. Projection also poisons relationships. It leads to misunderstandings, conflicts, and distance. When one person projects, they are not relating to the other as they truly are, but to a distorted image filtered through their own unresolved issues. This distortion erodes trust and connection, replacing them with judgment and resentment. In contrast, when an individual withdraws their projections, they make room for authentic relationships. They see others more clearly, not as extensions of their psyche, but as individuals in their own right. In the realm of personal growth, every ounce of energy counts. The more energy is consumed by projection, the less remains for discipline, creativity, and self-realization. This is why focusing on oneself, truly focusing, requires the dismantling of projection. It demands that a person take full ownership of their inner world, however uncomfortable that may be. Only then can real progress begin. The human psyche is not a simple or singular structure. It is a complex system of both conscious and unconscious elements. Among the most important and often overlooked parts of the unconscious is the shadow, the hidden aspect of the self that contains traits, emotions, impulses, and desires that one either represses or denies. The shadow is not inherently negative. It is simply the part of ourselves we have not integrated into our conscious identity. It can include envy, rage, lust, cowardice, and selfishness, but also creativity, strength, independence, and emotional depth. These elements are hidden not because they are meaningless, but because they are too uncomfortable or socially unacceptable for the ego to fully accept. Yet, ignoring the shadow does not make it disappear. On the contrary, what we repress gains power over us precisely because we are unaware of its influence. When a person sets out to focus on themselves and work hard, one of the greatest barriers they encounter is not external difficulty, but internal resistance, the unresolved parts of the self that sabotage progress. This is the shadow at work. It shows up as procrastination, self-doubt, irrational anger, destructive habits, and repeated patterns of failure. People often ask, "Why do I keep doing this to myself?" The answer is almost always found in the unconscious, the parts of the psyche that are acting independently of the conscious will. Until these parts are acknowledged, understood, and integrated, real transformation remains out of reach. The shadow must be faced. It must be brought into awareness, not judged but examined, so it can be transformed into strength. Avoiding the shadow is easy, and society encourages this avoidance. There is pressure to always appear positive, composed, successful, and in control. But this creates a false image that is disconnected from the deeper layers of the self. People hide behind this image, but inside they carry frustration, shame, resentment, and fear. The disconnect between who they pretend to be and who they really are becomes a source of internal tension. This tension leaks out in harmful ways: explosive outbursts, burnout, broken relationships, and self-sabotage. The very effort to maintain a polished exterior becomes the force that prevents growth. True focus cannot emerge from a fractured self. It requires wholeness, and wholeness only comes through integration. Confronting the shadow is a painful and humbling process. It involves looking at one's own cruelty, envy, laziness, or neediness without flinching. It means admitting to having impulses that one might have always condemned in others. But in doing so, a strange thing happens. The self becomes more grounded, more real. What was once a source of shame becomes a source of insight. The energy that was used to repress and deny can now be redirected toward productive effort. When a person accepts their flaws, they also gain access to their hidden strengths. The very qualities that once threatened the ego can now be used with conscious intention. Rage becomes determination, fear becomes caution, self-doubt becomes humility. This process is the foundation of deep personal work. It is not enough to set goals and follow routines if the inner world remains divided and unconscious forces are left unchecked. The more one brings light to their inner darkness, the more stable, focused, and powerful they become. By acknowledging and integrating the shadow, a person not only frees themselves from the past, but also lays the groundwork for authentic and lasting transformation. Discipline is often misunderstood as a rigid force imposed by external rules or societal expectations, but in truth, real discipline arises from an internal act of integration. It is the conscious alignment of the fragmented parts of the self, thoughts, emotions, intentions, and actions into a unified direction. When an individual becomes disciplined, they are not simply following routines or adhering to deadlines. They are learning to organize the conflicting voices within their psyche into a form of inner harmony. This kind of discipline is not driven by fear or the desire to impress others, but by a deep internal clarity about what truly matters. At the center of this clarity is purpose. Without a guiding sense of purpose, discipline becomes forced and unsustainable. A person may start out with energy, enthusiasm, and motivation, but if their inner world remains in conflict, if part of them is resisting, doubting, or unconvinced, they will eventually be pulled in different directions. This inner dissonance is what often causes people to break promises to themselves, abandon meaningful goals, or lose consistency. Integration means that all parts of the self, even those that are afraid, lazy, or uncertain, are brought into the conversation and aligned, not ignored or overpowered, but understood and redirected. Discipline as inner integration begins with self-awareness. One must first be able to observe the mind, to notice the impulses that arise, the fears that interfere, the moments of avoidance, the excuses that surface under pressure. Without this awareness, efforts to be disciplined are reactive rather than intentional. A person may follow a schedule or a habit for a short while, but because they are not consciously aware of what they are battling inside, they are caught off guard when the inner resistance becomes too strong. True discipline requires that one watches the self closely, not with harshness, but with precision and honesty. Once the inner landscape is visible, the next step is to create alignment. This means committing to action not as a way to escape discomfort, but as a way to move through it with awareness. The mind may want comfort, the emotions may crave distraction, but discipline calls for a deeper listening to the part of the self that holds the long-term vision. It is the voice that says, "I know this is difficult, but we must continue." This voice is not forceful or aggressive. It is steady and grounded, and with practice, it becomes stronger than the fleeting voices of temptation or fear. When discipline arises from this place of integration, it feels different. It is no longer a burden or a punishment. It becomes a kind of inner rhythm, a flow state that emerges from coherence. There is less friction, less internal argument. Decisions become simpler because the self is no longer divided. One knows what needs to be done, and there is no need to negotiate with every passing mood or distraction. This form of discipline builds momentum, and with momentum comes confidence, and with confidence comes a deeper trust in the self. Such discipline is powerful not because it dominates, but because it harmonizes. It turns chaos into order, confusion into clarity, hesitation into movement. It is an act of healing as much as it is an act of striving. When the inner world is in agreement, the outer actions gain force, and it is through this integration that true discipline takes root and flourishes. Isolation, in the context of personal development, is often misunderstood. People tend to associate it with loneliness, abandonment, or social failure, but there is a form of isolation that is sacred, intentional, and deeply transformative. It is the solitude one chooses in order to hear oneself clearly, to withdraw from the distractions of the world, and to come face to face with the essential core of being. In a society that glorifies constant interaction, validation, and noise, the idea of voluntarily stepping away can seem strange, even threatening. Yet this very stepping away is often the crucible in which true strength is forged. When a person isolates themselves for the sake of focus and self-work, they are not rejecting connection, but rather prioritizing clarity. They are saying, "I must understand who I am without the interference of others' opinions, needs, and expectations." This type of solitude is not passive. It is an active process of observation and recalibration. In silence, the inner voices that are usually drowned out by the noise of everyday life begin to speak. At first, these voices may be unsettling. Old fears rise to the surface, regrets, doubts, insecurities, forgotten dreams. These all appear when the external world is quiet. This is why many people run from isolation. They fear what they will find when they are finally alone with themselves. But those who endure this discomfort begin to experience something rare: clarity of thought, emotional honesty, and a deep sense of presence. They begin to distinguish between what is real and what is inherited. They see which of their goals are truly theirs and which were adopted from family, culture, or social pressure. They recognize patterns in their behavior that have gone unquestioned for years. In this space of quiet reflection, the mind begins to settle. Emotional storms pass. The body finds its natural rhythm, and from this stillness, a new kind of focus emerges. one that is rooted in authenticity rather than reaction. Strength built in isolation is not dependent on applause, feedback, or external rewards. It is not conditional on being seen or praised. It is internal and enduring. This kind of strength carries a quiet confidence. It allows a person to move through the world with purpose, unshaken by trends, criticism, or competition. They no longer need to be told who they are or what they are worth. They know, and this knowing becomes their anchor. Isolation also sharpens intention. When one is no longer performing for an audience, they can ask themselves what they truly want to do, who they want to be, and what kind of life they wish to build. These questions may not have immediate answers, but the silence gives them space to unfold. In contrast, constant engagement with others often clouds these questions. One becomes caught in cycles of comparison, competition, or compliance. But in solitude, the only voice that matters is the inner one. This period of chosen isolation does not need to last forever. In fact, its purpose is not to disconnect one from the world, but to help one return to it more whole, more centered, and more aware. It is a season of reflection that prepares a person to engage with life in a deeper and more meaningful way. By stepping away, one gains the strength to step forward with clarity, focus, and resilience. The modern world is saturated with distraction. From the moment one wakes, the mind is pulled in countless directions: notifications, opinions, trends, comparisons, endless streams of images and messages. In such an environment, staying present has become a rare skill. Most people live in a state of subtle fragmentation. Their attention is scattered between the past and the future, between what they are doing and what they think they should be doing, between who they are and who they are trying to appear to be. This fragmentation erodes the ability to focus deeply and work meaningfully. Presence, the ability to be wholly in the moment, conscious and engaged, is not only essential for productivity, it is the very foundation of a fulfilled and integrated life. When one is present, they are no longer at war with time. The task at hand becomes enough. The mind stops rehearsing old conversations or anticipating future outcomes. In that moment, clarity returns. The senses awaken. A kind of silent power emerges, not loud or dramatic, but steady and rooted. Work that is done in this state carries a different energy. It is infused with care, attention, and honesty. Whether one is writing, building, learning, or creating, the presence they bring to the process becomes visible in the outcome. This kind of work is not rushed or diluted by ego. It is deliberate and meaningful. It reflects a mind that is connected with itself, rather than enslaved by chaos. To cultivate presence requires a shift in attitude. One must begin to see the moment not as a stepping stone to something else, but as a complete and worthy experience in itself. This does not mean abandoning ambition or goals. It means realizing that the only place real progress can be made is in the now. Everything else, every imagined future or regretted past, is illusion unless it is met with attention in the present. When attention is divided, so is the self. Part of the mind pulls toward anxiety, another part toward memory, and the body becomes a passive instrument, dragged by invisible forces. In presence, however, all parts of the self reunite. There is a sense of inner coherence that allows the individual to operate from their full capacity. Staying present is not a passive state. It is an act of discipline and courage. The present moment is often uncomfortable, especially when it reveals aspects of the self one would rather avoid: boredom, impatience, fear, or uncertainty. But this discomfort is not the enemy. It is the doorway. By staying with it, observing it without escape or judgment, one learns to become intimate with their own experience. This intimacy is what transforms ordinary moments into opportunities for growth. A simple task, reading, cleaning, working, can become a meditation when infused with presence. The mind becomes sharper, the heart quieter, the spirit more aligned. The present moment is also where truth resides. All illusions, whether about the self or the world, dissolve when one is fully attentive. In presence, it becomes clear what is real and what is performative, what is necessary and what is distraction. One no longer acts out of compulsion or habit, but from conscious choice. This awareness begins to influence every part of life. Relationships become more authentic, decisions more grounded, actions more purposeful. In a world that constantly demands speed and performance, the choice to slow down and return to the now is a radical act. It is a reclaiming of one's own consciousness. It is not an escape from responsibility, but a deeper embrace of it. For it is only in presence that one can truly focus on themselves, refine their purpose, and do the kind of work that is not only productive, but transformative. The journey inward is not an escape from the world. It is a return to it with new eyes. When you stop projecting, face your shadow, cultivate discipline, embrace solitude, and root yourself in the present, you begin to align with something far deeper than fleeting motivation. You become whole, you become focused, and from that focus, a quiet power rises, not to conquer others, but to master yourself. Let the world spin as it may. Your work is within. Focus on yourself. Work hard, not just to achieve, but to awaken. The rest will follow.